Pro players are GAing weapons in competitive Halo Infinite. They don't like the sword. They don't like the Mangler. They don't like the drop combo. What do they like? Just the BR and the sniper? What the heck is going on? Is this getting out of hand? In today's video, I'm going to tell you everything I know. Whether you're a casual viewer or a pro in the scene, by the end of this video, you're going to understand this whole situation. First off, what the heck is a GA? In case you don't know, GA stands for Gentleman's Agreement. It's essentially a handshake agreement between pros to not do or use a certain item in their esport. GAs happen in many different esports. In Halo Infinite, we've seen a GA for the Mangler for the past several months. Pros have unanimously agreed to not use the Mangler in tournament. Now, this is not an official rule, so technically speaking, you could go to a tournament and you could use a Mangler, but if you do, that's a sign of disrespect. Good luck developing any relationships with any pro players. You're not going to get scrims. You're basically going to get a lot of friction from the rest of the community if you start using the Mangler in tournament. Now, admittedly, the Mangler, at least by design, is a pretty cool weapon, and it's part of Halo Infinite's sandbox, and controlling the diverse sandbox in Halo is a big part of what makes Halo Halo in the first place. So, is removing the Mangler from competitive good for the game? Are pros just being whiny babies? Should they just adapt and get used to it? My perspective, and I shared something similar on this in a video last year, is that for Halo Infinite to be a healthy esport, it needs to basically accomplish three key objectives. The first is it needs to be as fair and balanced as possible. Of course, it's a competition. People are staking their livelihoods on winning tournaments in this game. If it's poorly balanced, then the entire integrity as an esport crumbles. Two is it should prioritize skill and skillful expression. Once again, it's a competition. Having skillful elements allows the best players to succeed. And it also makes the game deeper and more interesting for pros and spectators as well. And three is about the spectators. It's about preserving the unique identity of the game so that the competitive side of the game doesn't deviate too far from the core product. In Halo's case, having a diverse sandbox is a unique identifying feature of the franchise. Having a bunch of different interesting weapons on the map can also make the experience more exciting for viewers and spectators. All three of these elements are important and need to be considered for Halo to remain a healthy esport. So if ever there's a problem in Halo Esports and pros are GAing weapons, before the casual community and the pros community starts fighting and the flame wars begin, the fairest approach here would be to take those pain points and run them through these three filters. So let's do that. We'll start with the Mangler. What problems are pros having with the Mangler? It used to be a one-shot beatdown. Now it's a two-shot beatdown, but it's still being GA'd. Why? Well, in the hands of a pro or even an intermediate player, the Mangler is a pretty powerful weapon. One shot to the body halves your shields. Two shots and your shields are completely gone. And it's not very difficult to hit body shots with the Mangler, especially on controller. There's a pretty healthy amount of aim assist and bullet magnetism kind of guiding your shot to the point where in the hands of a pro, they are not only effective in a close range and a mid range, but in some cases, they're practically sniping with this thing across the map. Simply just hitting one shot across the map is a big deal in competitive Halo. A half shields player is an easy cleanup for a teammate or valuable info you can use to push up aggressively on the map. And while landing a three-shot perfect with the Mangler might be where some of the difficulty and skill comes into play, having powerful mechanics like the drop combo, which we'll talk about more, completely removes that element of skill. If you can just two-shot with the Mangler, drop, and then hit a much more forgiving headshot with the BR, and get a faster time to kill than a typical three-shot Mangler, you're looking at a pretty powerful combo. Now, the Mangler is a weapon that needs to be scavenged. You got to go out on the map and find it and pick it up to take advantage of it. So it having some power is obviously understandable. But the other issue is its spawn frequency. Now, the Mangler is a tier 1 weapon. It spawns on the lowest tier rack, meaning it spawns every 30 seconds in the game, regardless of whether or not a player is holding one. So as long as the rack is empty, 30 seconds later, another Mangler spawns, meaning that this weapon could technically be all over the map at any time. No matter how many people have it, you could stack it and have 4 players with a Mangler, technically. And currently, the Mangler is simply just better than every other tier 1 weapon in the sandbox. It's better than the plasma pistol, better than the sidekick, than the disruptor, even better than the needler. In some cases, it beats shotgun, at least pre-patch. It was better than shotguns, right? So because it's so powerful and it's clearly the best tier 1 weapon, it's going to get picked up and prioritized over the other weapons in the sandbox. You're going to see a lot more of it and a lot less of everything else. Basically an overabundance of this one weapon because of the way it's balanced and how frequently it spawns, which is problematic in all areas of the game. Ideally, tier 1 weapons with the same spawn frequency should have an equal level of utility, right? Especially considering the Mangler in some cases spawns on one side of the map and doesn't spawn on the other. It's kind of like giving one team an unfair advantage. And I'm sure some people are thinking, okay, if the Mangler is stronger than other tier 1 weapons, then why don't you just buff the other tier 1 weapons? Well, What's number 2 in our objectives? To maintain skill and skill expression in competitive Halo. These lower tier weapons are designed to be easier by default, and they're already very useful. If you watch comp right now, you'll see the plasma pistol, the sidekick, the disruptor in play all the time. If you buff them, it can lead to pros abusing their advantages in unskillful ways. Take the Mangler pre-patch. Half the game was about sitting behind a wall and one-shot beatdowning your opponent in close range. So those are the main issues pros are having with the Mangler. It's very powerful and not very skillful. It's so available and spawns so frequently that pros are selecting it over other weapons in the same category and abusing its advantages, which hurts game balance. And generally this perspective is shared amongst the competitive community. I'll share my own thoughts and next steps later in the video. For now, let's move on to the sword. Hands down, the biggest problem pros are having with the sword right now is the trade window. Getting a melee trade with the sword is extremely difficult. It's actually almost impossible to do. If you have a sword and you're no shields and you melee trade with somebody, you do not die. If you are no shields, you have a sword and you're low health and you melee trade, you still don't die. What happens is you become red barred. You've got no health. You've got no shield. If you try to melee trade with the sword while you're red barred, you can die. But even that is not consistent. I had my editor do some testing. There's an instance where he's red barred. You hear the melee come out, and the trade still doesn't happen. He stays red barred and doesn't die. Now, to be fair, the sword is a power weapon. It spawns once every 4 minutes. In a 12-minute game without overtime, you'll see it a maximum of 3 times. Every sword only has 4 slashes as well, so maximum 4 kills per sword pickup. Despite all of that, the big issue pros are also having is the maps and how the maps change the way you play with the sword. Pro player King Nick has a good tweet, good thread about this. If you think about a map like Recharge, for example, the center of the map might be very open, but the outer perimeter is extremely close quarters, just corridors and doors. There's not really much you can do if somebody's sitting behind a door with a sword and you get caught. There's no room to escape, no room for outplayability. You're basically screwed. In past Halo games, maps were a little bit more open, and it was more risky to get out in the open with the sword to try to slash and get a kill. In Halo Infinite, because of the way these maps are designed, specifically Recharge, Catalyst a little bit as well, but with Recharge, the gameplay becomes extremely campy in these rooms, and they just kind of wait for opportunities to slash you around the corner. Take Infinite's movement on top of that with the sprint and the slide and the curve slide and the grapple and the repulsor and all the equipment you can use to just soar across a map so quickly, and it's almost like you're unkillable in certain situations when you're up against a pro. Options to counter the sword are kind of limited as well, and the placement of certain utility spawns doesn't really benefit it either. For example, the best counter, hands down, to the sword is the repulsor, but on both Recharge and Catalyst, the repulsor and the sword spawn right next to each other. If you pick up the sword, you're likely also going to get the repulsor to work with as well. That combo makes it very tough if that's a main counter. You got plasmas, you've got the disruptor pistol, a couple other things you can do to kind of hopefully trade with it. It's just a difficult situation. I do recommend you check out King Nick's thread, though. He touches on all of it. I'll link it in the description. Also, this is just an online concern, but it's no secret that Halo Infinite Online is a little unstable at times. Desync is an issue, and when the connection's not very good, I find the sword is the absolute worst offender. Some of the craziest stuff I've ever seen in Halo Infinite comes down to bad connection and the sword. And it is just online, but if you're having 125K tournaments online and the sword doesn't operate well with bad connection, that's an issue. So those are the main problems that pros are having with the sword. Well, it might not be as available as the Mangler, and there's clearly some risk associated with using it because of the way the maps are laid out. Because you can't trade with it, teams are basically camping with it and using it to completely swing the momentum in games to the point where pros feel like it's hurting balance and hurting skill expression. The last big offender is the drop combo. Now, this topic is kind of tricky, mainly because as far as I can tell, it seems like it's still controversial in the pro community. Some pros don't like the drop combo. Some pros don't mind it. I have a video breaking down this mechanic in detail. If you haven't seen it, I still stand by everything I said in that video. I recommend you check it out, maybe after this. But here's the abbreviated version. Basically, you can map drop weapon to a button on your controller. When you tap that button, you drop your weapon, swap to your secondary. For whatever reason, doing this swaps to your secondary much faster than a standard weapon swap. It doesn't happen for every weapon, but for most weapons, you're instantly swapping to that secondary. What's happening is pros are using this to combo with the BR in just about every weapon, mid-tier, power weapon, etc. Despite only having to press one button, there is still a little bit of skill and finesse associated with properly timing the combo, using it in the right situations, dropping your weapon, and the risk of having to pick it back up again in the middle of combat. It's not completely free. The biggest issue I'm seeing, though, is it does take away some of the inherent skill associated with whatever primary weapon you have at the time. For example, Like earlier I said with the Mangler, a 3-shot perfect is kind of tough to do, but if you can 2-shot, drop the BR, hit an easier headshot, and get a faster time to kill than a 3-shot Mangler perfect, it's kind of very powerful, right? And this applies to like any weapon. Think the Stalker. A 3-shot perfect kill with a Stalker is kind of skillful at times. Swapping to BR takes away a lot of the skill in hitting the final headshot in the fight. And at this point in the competitive meta, most players have a paddle under their controller mapped to drop weapons, so it becomes kind of an effortless muscle memory to just tap that paddle, drop your weapon, swap to BR for a fast and easier headshot. At this point, pros basically see it as a bailout mechanic. If you're in a bad spot, you got bad positioning, somebody catches you off guard, 2-shot with the Stalker or 1-shot with the shotgun, and then tap the button, switch quickly, get the kill. And then take the fact that pros already believe that most weapons in the sandbox are pretty powerful. You take the shotgun, the heat wave, or the shock rifle, ask a pro, they'll say it's already very strong. The drop weapon makes strong weapons even stronger. So that seems to be the main issue. Once again, it's a skill and balance concern. Everybody's just effortlessly dropping weapons and getting out of bad situations. So there's your context. That basically covers all the issues pros are having in those 3 areas. And to be honest, I don't think these issues are that unreasonable, especially if your livelihood depends on competing in this game. But then what does that mean? That means that pros are now boycotting these weapons and they're not using them. And I'm sure some people are thinking, well, that's just stupid, right? Am I not supposed to pick up sword anymore? I can't press a button on my controller to drop a weapon mid-gunfight? And to that, I'd say you are absolutely right. This is so stupid. This is stupid as hell, right? It's terrible for the game, terrible for ranked play. You got people picking up the Mangler and the sword and getting teabagged, getting hate mail. That perspective, it bleeds into the surrounding community. It leads to arguments. Imagine having a big tournament. You got new viewers wondering why the sword isn't getting picked up on the map and nobody's talking about it, right? It's confusing. So dumb. Obviously, this is not the best way to solve this issue, and some pros are not very sensitive in how they communicate here either, making them all look like bad guys. But unfortunately, the pros don't really have much of a choice here. The other big issue in this whole situation is sadly just 343. Straight up, 343 are just not holding up their end of the bargain right now. In my experience with the pro community, most pros don't want to nerf or remove the entire sandbox in favor of the battle rifle and the sniper. Diversity in the sandbox is exciting, entertaining for viewers as well. They just care about balance and skill expression. They're not trying to hurt the casual community. They only care about maintaining balance within their tournaments. Take the Mangler, for example. Sure, it's on the powerful side, but that doesn't mean it needs to be nerfed to work in competitive. Nerfing the weapon hurts everybody. The main issue with the Mangler in comp is its availability. Just change the spawn timer so it spawns less frequently. Make it spawn in the middle of the map so it's equal distance and players have to fight over it. Or pros have suggested making it a tier 2 weapon for competitive. Tier 2 weapons like the shotgun, the Stalker, only one person can possess that weapon at a time till it despawns, then it respawns again. That would solve the issue. Or if none of that works, just change it out with the sidekick. The sidekick already spawns in social in the same location. It sounds as easy as just swapping it out, right? The sidekick is a respected weapon. It's only available in Aquarius. It's got skins that pros want to show off, right? You'd still have sandbox diversity, and the Mangler and the casual community is not hurt by this. It sounds easy enough, right? And by the way, this is all the pros in the competitive community have ever wanted for the Mangler. Nobody wants to nerf the Mangler. They probably don't care if it got nerfed, but if you, for whatever reason, think that it's the pros' fault that 343 nerfed the Mangler back in May, and they're trying to suck the fun out of the game, like that is so painfully inaccurate, dude. Come on. 343, and this is my speculation, but they nerfed it because it's a tier 1 weapon, and they want it to stay as a tier 1 weapon, but it's better than every other tier 1 weapon, obviously, right? Like, look back into Halo's history. When's the last time you saw a weapon that's capable of a 3-shot kill at range and a 1-shot beatdown in close quarters? Like, never. It's like a Mauler on crack. It spawns as frequently as a Mauler, but it's 10 times better. I get that for some people, Halo's just about stupid fun. It's like a party game. You drink, whatever. Like, who cares about weapon balancing? Let me just get in there and have a good time. And you're right. That's fine. That's what custom games are for. I'm sorry. 343 failed you there too, right? Like, there's no outlet for that aspect of the game right now, but the vanilla game still needs to be balanced. Whether it's social or competitive, balance is important, and the Mangler in its tier is not balanced. It either moves up a tier, but I don't think 343 want that. They want it to be a little sidearm pistol, so they want to keep it where it is. They got to nerf it. Anyway, getting lost in a tangent here, but basically the Mangler had that nerf coming, regardless of pro perspective. Also, nobody could have predicted or even asked for the way they nerfed it, right? They nerfed the melee across the board, indirectly nerfing the commando and every automatic. Like, who asked for that, right? But I guess they kept the BR the same in competitive, so they're sort of paying attention to the competitive community. But if the issue was that 343 was listening to pros too much, then we wouldn't even have GAs. This video wouldn't even exist, right? So it doesn't really make sense. The point I was trying to make here is, as easy as it sounds to just change the spawn timer on certain weapons or swap the Mangler out with the sidekick, apparently that's not an easy process. And I don't understand game design, so I can't really criticize this, but either this is very difficult for 343 to do right now, or it's just not their priority. And here's Tashi. He's the Halo Esports viewership lead at 343. Here are his thoughts on the GA.
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking at and talking about this stuff. Ultimately, we just need to get updates out the door to try to balance these things. So, you know, I don't necessarily blame pros for, you know, trying to do what they can to uphold the balance. If, like, honestly, we haven't upheld our end of the bargain, so I don't blame them. Ultimately, I don't think GAs are good for the scene, but they're, in my mind, a symptom of a bigger problem that we need to solve. So,
honestly, very professional response from Tashi, so thank you, but also a very unfortunate response. And this is about all the transparency we've received on this topic. It seems like Tashi empathizes with the pros and understands why they're taking actions into their own hands, but ultimately there's not too much he can do in his position. Here he is again in an interview with Tools on LVT. He's talking about how the HCS team operates separately from 343's multiplayer team.
Back in the day, right, it's like MLG, if there was something wrong, like MLG was a separate playlist. It had nothing to do with like Bungie, right? So they could just like make those decisions single-handedly, like fix maps. That hasn't really been the case as of yet. Like, do you ever
want that though?
You do want that, or you don't?
No. I think that's a bad thing.
Oh, okay. Can you elaborate as to why you think that would be a bad thing? Because
our team is not equipped to develop the game the way it needs to be, like a AAA game and a big esport. Like, what other big esport do you see has something like that? Like, I don't think there are any. And I think that was done out of necessity back in the day, not because, hey, this is the ideal thing to do. Players and fans do not want like the HCS team to just have like total control over the stuff. Like, we are equipped to like run a league and manage partners and like put on events and have a great entertainment product. Like, we are not the development team. The way it's set up now is the right way, and I think we just need to like execute on it. So that's what I'll say on that. Like, you don't want it to be splintered off that way.
So basically, like Tashi said, the HCS team is focused strictly on running the league, on managing partners, putting on events, having a good entertainment product. Great. The actual multiplayer team that makes the final decisions on settings, they work independently of the HCS. The HCS is not equipped to make any decisions here, so all Tashi can do is basically pass the info along, I guess. Tashi also said he thinks it's best that these teams stay completely separate. And I'm not sure how I feel about this. I'll open it up to your theories in the comments. I can understand not wanting to have the HCS team have total control over competitive settings. And note that we're just talking about competitive settings, nothing else. But there's got to be some kind of compromise here, right? Because not addressing any of these concerns and basically going radio silent is worse for the game. It continues to foster this us versus them mentality, and our now very impatient community is basically pointing the blame at each other. It just feels like the dev team responsible for making changes on the competitive playlists is very far removed from the competitive community. Like, take ranked 2s, for example. First off, thank you so much for ranked 2v2. I appreciate you. But why is Catalyst weighted 70% over everything else? Like, what's going on there? There's been a year of 2v2 tournaments run by LVT, run by your partner teams with thousands of viewers. I feel like it should be pretty clear what the preferred competitive settings are for 2s at this point. And Catalyst is just simply not in the rotation. Pros are not playing Catalyst in 2v2s. I can understand making it 50%. It's a newer map. You want to show it off. That's fine. You know, it's your game. But like 70% to weight it heavier and to force it on the community when the community has deemed it as not a good competitive map for 2s just feels out of touch. Like, at least give us some feedback on why that's done. And note that I completely understand that the internal team at 343 is very data-driven. They make decisions off certain statistics that we as a community aren't aware of or simply don't have access to. The devs are more knowledgeable, they're more well-equipped. In many categories, they know what's best for this game, and I'm not trying to challenge that. But you also have to have your finger on the pulse of the community when you make those decisions, or you're going to upset a lot of people. The skill jump patch was a perfect example. When they removed skill jumping, if you read the patch notes, it's all dev perspective on readability, on their philosophy on where you should and should not be able to jump. And those philosophies are important, but there's zero consideration of the fact that the community loves skill jumping. If you don't consider that and you take it out, of course they're going to get upset. And then here we are rewinding things. It is pretty wild how this somehow all just worked in the past. Like, Halo 3 was a thriving social game. Bungie was not invested in the esports side of it, but I believe they gave the MLG team access to an MLG playlist. The MLG playlist had completely different settings than the vanilla game. The sandbox tuning was different. The equipment wasn't on the map. They even increased base movement speed by 10%, which honestly sounds blasphemous in today's Halo. Maybe we all just got lucky, to be honest, like a product of its time. Expectations in the industry were different back then. There weren't many. Maybe now that esports is seen as an important revenue stream and a marketing opportunity for the game, then more restrictions need to be placed on competitive so that it's more aligned with the core product they're marketing. I don't know, I'm just speculating. But from a marketing perspective, what makes more sense to the viewer? Having a ton of weapons on the map that the pros don't think are balanced and they aren't even picking them up, or finding a compromise here so we can have a game that's fully embraced by your competitive community? Because in the end of the day, it's the players that are going to play it. Is it really that big of a deal to have just one more fluid HCS playlist focused on the competitive side of the game? A playlist that has some ability to change according to player feedback or developments in the meta in the game, and that has no effect on the rest of the game in the casual community, just the one playlist, right? Like, every other Halo game has this to some extent, plus several other ranked playlists. We seem to be caught in this, like, unfortunate catch-22 where too many playlists splits the population, but too few playlists is killing the population because there's no outlet for people to play how they want to play. A big obstacle in Halo Infinite right now is there's just no outlet for pros to even test out different competitive settings. In custom games, we have no ability to change what weapons spawn where or how frequently weapons spawn. We can change ammo count though, and that's actually a big deal. In the 2s playlist, some weapons have less ammo than they do in the ranked playlist. Take the Shock, for example. The Shock Rifle has 8 shots in 2s and has 12 shots in ranked. The Shock Rifle is a tier 2 weapon, meaning when it despawns on the map, it respawns again 30 seconds later. Only one player can have it. By lowering the ammo, the frequency you see the weapon isn't going to change much, but the impact that one player can have with it will change. And that's a big deal in competitive play. Honestly, if it's a dev side limitation that's making it so that we can't make these other changes in custom games, then maybe just change ammo count for competitive play. That's a step in the right direction, and it might lead to less GAs. But basically, all of this said, we've been left to our own devices here. The competitive community has been playing the same settings for 9 months, and as the meta solidifies and nothing changes, the unbalanced aspects of the game are becoming more and more problematic. And 343's radio silence and lack of transparency here has led to impatience from the pro community. And the pros are now crying on Twitter. And the casual community sees them crying and they say, shut up, you're entitled. It's your fault that the game is under-delivering. And now we're all fighting. Overall, I think GAing anything sucks for the game. Like I expressed earlier, pros have valid concerns. I understand why they're doing what they're doing, but this is a very slippery slope. I'm already seeing it online. You start with the sword and then the drop combo. What's next, right? Many pros have different viewpoints. Sometimes they're conflicting. It just creates a difficult situation to deal with. I like the sword personally. I think it's a unique and exciting aspect of Halo for spectators, so removing it definitely sucks. The trade window is an issue though, and I hope 343 can look into it. It's just nearly impossible to trade with it. In the past, some Halo games have had sword parrying, so you can even block it a little bit, though I understand that might be too drastic, but maybe just a very minor change to the trade window so it's a little bit more reasonable to fight against. That might drastically help competitive and not really affect social play. I also think the drop combo is a cool mechanic, but at this point, it's pretty clear the reward outweighs the difficulty. I don't really like removing depth from Halo. I think these unique discoveries are part of what makes Halo so sick, but like I said in my drop combo video, maybe just make it hold to drop and take out the ability to tap to drop and keep the animation speed the same. So you have to hold to drop to complete the combo now. You still get an advantage. There's just more risk. There's more difficulty associated. It's more of an actual skill gap. In the end of the day, I don't compete at the highest level. If the best players in the world agree to not use something in a tournament, we pretty much have to respect it. If you are a pro, though, and I feel like I'm probably speaking into the void saying this, but can you try your best, please, to be less abrasive and a little bit more sensitive about how you communicate your issues to the public? Like, please, as a pro, you have a platform. Your opinions shape the culture of the community. If you're pushing out negativity on the game and you're disrespecting people who don't agree with you, it's just irresponsible, man. Like, it leads to outrageous takes and misinformation. If you got a problem with something, maybe just think a bit more about how you're going to articulate it. Add some context so the broader community can understand it. I'll shout out Snakebite here. I think Snakebite sets a good example as someone who has concerns but shares them in a more constructive way. I think if we can see more of this, the whole community will benefit. The casual scene will understand we're not trying to hurt them, and maybe the devs will be more inspired to listen to us. To 343, obviously, I don't know what's going on over there, but we get that you're struggling. You built a game on a new engine with some stumbles and a pandemic and rushed time constraints along the way, and then you released it to a community with very high expectations in dozens of different facets you can't even accommodate in an industry with more societal and technological layers and complexities than ever before. And despite all of that, you actually have the bones of an incredible game. People are so upset because when this game came out, they saw so much potential. There is a lot that I love about Halo Infinite, and I believe that eventually things will improve and come together, and it's why I'm still here. But you got to help us help you a bit here. Find a way to break down some of the barriers in this whole bureaucracy you got going on over there and just communicate with your fans a little more along the way. And you clearly have a lot of cool stuff in the works as well. Like, why are we learning about everything through leaks right now? We want to get excited about this game with you. Anyway, what it all comes down to is I think and hope that we all just want the same things for Halo. We just want to see Halo thrive again in all areas of the game. For the record, I definitely wasn't expecting to rant this long, so hopefully this video gave you some clarity on the whole competitive situation and maybe a few other helpful messages. If you're tired and you've given up on Halo and you want to leave, honestly, I understand. But if you want to stick around, it is definitely going to be a waiting game. All I can say is try to be more constructive, try to be kind to one another, because that, as cheesy as it sounds, is the Shyway.